The Duke of Ravenshire did not bow when he entered Ashbourne Hall. He looked at Lady Clara Ashbourne as if her answer had already been decided. "Lady Clara," he said quietly, removing his gloves one finger at a time. "I have come to ask you to marry me." Clara stared at him. 3 days earlier, she had stood at the altar while half of London watched her bridegroom fail to appear. 2 days earlier, the gossip sheets had printed whispers about her father's debts. That morning, a creditor had asked whether her mother intended to sell the silver before the house itself. Now the most feared duke in England stood in her fading drawing-room, offering marriage. "Your Grace," Clara said slowly, "I believe you are mistaken." Sebastian Blackwood did not look mistaken. Tall, severe, and dressed in black, he stood with the stillness of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I rarely am." Clara's fingers tightened around the letter that had ended her future. "Recent circumstances have forced me to reconsider our future." 3 years dismissed in one sentence. "I have no fortune," she said. "No useful connections. Society has already made me a warning." "Yes," the Duke replied. The honesty stung. "Then why me?" For the first time, something shifted in his face. "Because I saw you at the church." Clara went cold. "I saw them waiting for you to break," he said. "You did not." Then he gave her until noon to decide. And Clara understood only one thing: the man everyone feared had chosen her at the exact moment everyone else had abandoned her. Chapter 1: Left at the altar. He did not knock. That was the first thing Clara noticed. The Duke of Ravenshire walked through the doors of Ashbourne Hall as though the estate already belonged to him, his dark coat untouched by the January cold, his expression carved from something harder than patience. He did not bow. He did not offer pleasantries. He simply crossed the faded drawing-room, stopped 3 feet from where Clara stood, and looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. "Lady Ashbourne," he said quietly, "I have come to ask you to marry me." The fire in the hearth had nearly gone out. Clara did not move. Can you imagine hearing those words 3 days after being abandoned at the altar? Stay with me, because nothing about what happens next is what you would expect. 3 days earlier, Clara Ashbourne had been a bride. She had stood inside St. George's Church in an ivory gown her mother had spent 6 months altering, holding white roses that had already begun to wilt from the warmth of her hands. Half of London society filled the pews. Whispers were still warm then, friendly, the kind that preceded celebration. The vicar had cleared his throat twice before anyone acknowledged something was wrong. Edward Pembroke was not coming. The sealed letter arrived instead, delivered by a nervous footman who could not meet Clara's eyes. The vicar broke the wax and read it quietly to himself first, which told Clara everything before he said a single word. "Recent circumstances have forced me to reconsider our future." That was all. 3 years of courtship. Every walk in every garden. Every careful letter. Every quiet promise made in the presence of both their families. Ended in one sentence, delivered by a stranger, in front of everyone she had ever known. Clara did not cry. Not there. Not where they could see her. She lifted her chin, handed her wilting roses to the nearest bridesmaid, and walked back down the aisle alone. Every eye in that church followed her. No one stood. No one came forward. Society simply watched, the way it always watches, quietly, hungrily, storing details for later use. Ask yourself this: if the entire room was watching you fall apart, what would you do? Because what Clara did next tells you exactly who she is. By the following morning, the newspapers had already decided the story. The Ashbourne family finances, long kept quiet through careful management and pride, were suddenly public conversation. Creditors appeared before the week ended, polite at first, then less so. Invitations that had been promised stopped arriving. The social calendar Clara had spent years cultivating simply closed, like a door shut from the inside. Edward, she later learned, had already secured an engagement to the daughter of Earl Whitmore. A fortune large enough to fund his parliamentary ambitions for a decade. He had chosen money. Quietly. Strategically. Without the courtesy of honesty. Inside Ashbourne Hall, the silence became its own kind of weight. Her mother, already fragile from years of carefully managed grief, grew visibly weaker. Clara noticed the gaps on the walls where paintings had recently hung. She noticed the silver candlesticks missing from the dining table. She said nothing. She simply folded Edward's letter each morning and unfolded it again each evening, reading it until the words stopped having the power to hurt her. They never fully stopped. Which brought her to this moment. This cold drawing room. This man she had never properly spoken to, standing 3 feet away with the posture of someone who had never once doubted his own presence in any room. "Why me?" Clara asked. Sebastian Blackwood's expression did not change. "Because disappointment tends to remove illusions," he said. "And I have no patience for illusions." She stared at him. "You are offering marriage out of practicality." "I am offering marriage instead of ruin," he said. "Those are different things." He laid it out with the warmth of a legal document. Her family's debts. The estate's remaining months before forced sale. The social exile that would follow without a powerful name attached to hers. He did not embellish. He did not apologize. He simply placed the facts in front of her the way one places evidence before a court. He needed a duchess. Someone stable. Someone without romantic expectations that would eventually complicate a practical arrangement. No love. No affection. No pretending. "You pity me," Clara said. "Pity fades," he replied. "Practicality lasts." He left without waiting for her answer. At the door, he paused once. "A carriage will return tomorrow morning. If you enter it, I will consider your answer given." He didn't ask again. He simply left. And Clara was alone. That night, she stood in the corridor outside the servants' quarters and heard 2 of them speaking in low voices about which pieces of furniture would sell fastest and whether the family silver might cover another month. She walked back to her room slowly. The wedding gown still hung on the back of the wardrobe door, ivory and silent, exactly where she had left it 3 days ago. She had not been able to move it. She stood there for a long time, listening to the rain strike the windows, thinking about practicality, about survival, about the cold eyes of a man who had walked into her ruined life and offered her a transaction instead of a future. The carriage would come in the morning. The only question was whether she would be standing at the door when it arrived. Chapter 2: A Marriage of Necessity. The carriage arrived exactly when he said it would. Clara had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not from indecision, that had been settled somewhere between midnight and the sound of rain fading into silence. She had made her decision standing in front of that wedding gown, and she had not unmade it by morning. She had simply sat with it, the way one sits with something irreversible, learning its shape before it becomes permanent. She allowed herself one last walk through the house. Not long. Not theatrical. Just the morning room where her mother had read letters for 30 years. The window seat where Clara had spent entire winters with books she barely remembered. The portrait of her father above the mantel, still watching the room with the patient expression of a man who had believed everything would eventually be fine. Everything had not been fine. She touched the frame once, briefly, and walked to the door. Her mother stood in the entrance hall wrapped in a shawl, her eyes too bright in the way that meant she was refusing to cry. Clara kissed her cheek and held both her hands. "The creditors will not come again." Her mother nodded as though she believed it. She stepped into the carriage without looking back. Sebastian was already waiting at the chapel when she arrived. Dark coat. Controlled expression. He studied her for precisely 1 second. "Very well," he said. That was all. The chapel was smaller than Clara had imagined. Stone walls. Narrow windows. Winter light arriving in pale columns that illuminated nothing warmly. A reverend who spoke the vows with professional solemnity. Mrs. Dalton, the housekeeper, assembled and severe to the left. Graves, the butler, holding the register with the stillness of someone whose role was to observe and remember. No flowers. No music. No guests. Clara repeated her vows clearly and without trembling. Sebastian repeated his in the same tone he had used to explain debt structures 2 evenings ago, measured, precise, committed to accuracy rather than feeling. When the Reverend indicated the conclusion of the ceremony, Sebastian turned to her. The kiss was brief. A formality executed correctly. His lips touched hers for less than 2 seconds, and she had already decided it meant nothing when she noticed something. He paused. Not visibly, to anyone watching. But Clara was watching from the closest possible distance, and she saw it, a single moment where something behind his controlled expression shifted, like a door moving a fraction in wind before someone closes it firmly again. Then he stepped back. The moment sealed itself shut. Did you catch that? Because Clara caught it. And she filed it away carefully, the way women in impossible situations file away every small thing that might one day explain something larger. Ravenshire house was enormous. The entrance hall alone was larger than the entire ground floor of Ashbourne Hall. Marble floors. Ceilings that required effort to fully see. Fires already lit in every room as though the house had been informed of her arrival and arranged itself accordingly. It was beautiful. It was immaculate. It felt like a museum that had recently decided to permit one resident. Mrs. Dalton conducted the tour efficiently. Every room explained. Every comfort present and accounted for. What was absent was warmth, not physical warmth. The fires ensured that. The other kind. The kind that makes a house feel inhabited by people rather than maintained by systems. When Clara passed through the village the following morning, the shift was immediate. A shopkeeper who had offered her polite indifference 6 months ago now bowed before she had fully descended from the carriage. 2 women who had been whispering in the church on the day she was abandoned now dipped their eyes and moved aside. Society had not warmed to Clara. Society had simply become afraid of who stood beside her. There is a difference between being respected and being protected by someone others fear. Clara understood that difference immediately. The question was whether it would ever stop feeling like a cold substitute for the real thing. Dinner that first evening was served in a dining room built for 20. Sebastian had instructed Graves to reset the place settings at one corner, close enough to speak, though not close enough to suggest intimacy. He was a composed dinner companion. Reasonable questions. Practical observations. He ate without visible pleasure and listened without visible discomfort. He was, Clara thought, perfectly polite and entirely absent. She set down her fork. "You rescued me from humiliation," she said. Sebastian glanced up. "I corrected a practical problem." "Yes." Clara folded her hands on the table. "But what exactly am I supposed to do with loneliness?" The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. He looked at her the way someone looks at a question they were not prepared for. Something crossed his face, almost discomfort. "The estate provides considerable." "I am not asking about the estate," Clara said quietly. Another silence. And then, so briefly she might have imagined it, the corner of Sebastian Blackwood's mouth moved. Not a smile. Not fully. But the shadow of something that had once known how to be won. He said nothing. But he did not look away. She found the study by accident, following a lamp left burning past midnight. Every surface purposeful. Books arranged by subject. A desk clear of sentiment. A single glass of untouched brandy. And there, between two shelves on the far wall, a portrait. Clara crossed the room slowly. The woman in the painting was dark-haired, her expression somewhere between composure and quiet sadness. She sat with the stillness of someone who had agreed to be painted but preferred motion. Her eyes looked slightly past the viewer, toward something just beyond the frame. The woman did not look exactly like her. The features were not identical. But something in the set of the jaw, the angle of the shoulders, the particular way the hands were folded as though composure required active effort. Clara took one step back. "Why," she said aloud, to no one, to the empty room, to the untouched brandy and the house that had not yet decided to trust her. "Does she look like me?" Chapter 3. You chose a ghost. Clara told herself it was nothing. A portrait. An old painting left on a study wall by someone no longer relevant. Estates like Ravenshire accumulated history the way other houses accumulated dust, quietly, in corners, without explanation. She told herself this for 4 days. On the 5th day, she went back. The woman in the painting looked exactly as she had before. Dark-haired. Composed. Hands folded with the particular effort of someone maintaining stillness against their nature. Eyes directed at something just past the viewer, as though the painter had captured her mid-thought and she had never quite returned. Clara went to find Mrs. Dalton. The staff had been trained in the specific art of knowing nothing. Mrs. Dalton received her question with the expression of a woman who had anticipated it and prepared accordingly. The painting had always been there. She could not speak to its subject. Perhaps His Grace would be better placed to answer. His Grace was never available. Sebastian had returned to his parliamentary duties with the efficiency of a man grateful for legitimate reasons to be elsewhere. He appeared at dinner. He asked reasonable questions. He remained, as always, perfectly polite and entirely unreachable. Have you ever been in a room where everyone knows a secret except you? Where the silence itself has a shape? Stay with me, because Clara was about to find out exactly what that shape contained. She began searching the study systematically. Not frantically. The way a woman searches when she has decided the answer exists and patience is the only tool available. She found a key tucked inside the spine of a legal volume no one had opened in years. Either Sebastian had forgotten it, or he had placed it somewhere he believed no curious person would look. He had underestimated her considerably. The letters were tied with black ribbon. 12 of them, written in a hand that began confidently and grew gradually weaker. The name at the bottom of the first letter stopped Clara's breath entirely. Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor had been the daughter of a physician. Quiet and sharp and entirely unsuitable by society's measurements, which had made Sebastian choose her anyway, the one genuinely reckless decision of his otherwise controlled life. They had been engaged 14 months. He had loved her with the focused intensity of a man who loved very few things and therefore loved them completely. He had been away managing an estate matter when her illness worsened suddenly. The letters Eleanor wrote in those final weeks were never sent. They had been found among her belongings and returned to him afterward. Clara read them all. The last letter undid her. You treat feeling as though it were a liability, Eleanor had written, the handwriting unsteady now. Stop living as though feeling is weakness. It is not weakness. It is the only thing that makes any of this matter. He had read this after she was already gone. Clara sat in the silence for a long time. Then she found the second thing. A brief notation in Sebastian's own handwriting, tucked inside the final letter. A date. A location. St. George's Church. Clara's church. Clara's wedding. Clara's ruined mourning. He was there. The understanding arrived slowly, the way cold arrives, not all at once but incrementally, until the temperature of everything has changed and you cannot identify the exact moment it became unbearable. Sebastian had witnessed her standing abandoned at that altar. He had watched her walk back down the aisle alone, chin lifted, roses wilting, every eye in London following her without a single person standing to help. And something in that moment had reminded him of Eleanor. Ask yourself something. If you discovered the person who married you had first noticed you because you resembled someone they had lost, what would you feel? Gratitude? Grief? Fury? Because Clara felt all three, arriving simultaneously, and none of them gently. She found him in the library that evening. She did not raise her voice. She had discovered, somewhere between the altar and this moment, that she was most dangerous when she was quiet. You were at the church, she said. Sebastian turned from the window. Something moved behind his eyes, recognition, and behind it the stillness of a man waiting for a conversation he had hoped would not come. You watched Edward leave me standing there in front of everyone. 3 days later you arrived at my door. She stopped. I thought it was practicality. You told me it was practicality. Clara. She looks like me. Her voice remained steady, devastating in its steadiness. Eleanor Whitmore. She looks like me, and you were at that church, and you chose me 3 days after watching me refuse to cry in public. She looked at him directly. Just like her. Sebastian said nothing. The silence confirmed everything. You did not choose me, Clara said quietly. You married a memory. For the first time since Clara had entered his life, the composure cracked, not at the edges but at the center, the way ice cracks when weight finally exceeds what the surface was designed to hold. He admitted it. Not cleanly, but enough. That Eleanor had died while he chose duty. That he had carried that failure like a stone for years. That when he saw Clara at that altar, her dignity intact, her chin lifted, refusing to give society the satisfaction of her tears, something in him had recognized something he had failed to protect once before. I wanted to save someone, he said finally. Because I did not save her. Then you should have told me the truth, Clara said. Instead of dressing grief up as a contract and asking me to sign it. She walked to the door. Behind her, stripped of its usual architecture, his voice came quietly. Have I ruined this beyond repair? Clara did not turn around. She walked out. And the door closed between them with the soft, final sound of something fracturing. Chapter 4: The Duke Chooses Her. The days after the confrontation were quiet in a different way. Not the polished, managed silence Clara had grown accustomed to inside Ravenshire House. This was something rawer. The silence of two people existing in the same space after something true had finally been said between them, neither certain what came next. She expected Sebastian to retreat. It was what he knew. Distance was his fluent language, and she had just handed him every reason to speak it. He did not retreat. The first evening after their argument, he came to dinner without being summoned by obligation. He sat down, poured her wine before Graves could reach it, and asked what she had been reading. The question was simple. Unremarkable. But Clara recognized it for what it was, an attempt, imperfect and slightly awkward, from a man who had forgotten how attempts were made. She answered him. He listened. And here is where the story quietly shifts. Not dramatically. Not in a single moment. But the way dawn shifts, so gradually you cannot name the exact second darkness became light. Have you ever watched someone choose to become better in real time? It is one of the most quietly devastating things in the world. He remembered things she mentioned. A book she wanted. A street she had described from childhood. He did not announce that he remembered. He simply acted on it, the way people act on things they have genuinely absorbed rather than performed. Ravenshire House, that immaculate and silent museum, began almost imperceptibly to feel inhabited. A fire left burning past midnight in the sitting room. Her preferred tea appearing without request. Sebastian pausing in doorways during conversations instead of moving through them. Small things. Quietly chosen. Every single one of them deliberate. Clara noticed each one and said nothing. She was not yet ready to name what was happening. But she stopped bracing herself every time he entered a room. The Winter Assembly Ball arrived on a Thursday evening in February. London society had gathered in full force inside Whitmore Hall, the chandeliers blazing above a ballroom crowded with the kind of people who treated other people's stories as entertainment. Clara arrived on Sebastian's arm dressed in deep midnight blue, and the room noticed her the way rooms notice someone who has unexpectedly survived something they were meant to be destroyed by. She was scanning the far side of the room when she saw him. Edward Pembroke. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in the practiced way of men who have always relied on it, comfortable in his own presence the way people are comfortable when they believe consequences belong to other people. He caught her eye across the room and smiled, which was worse somehow than if he had looked away. He found them 20 minutes later near the East Corridor, his new fiancée conveniently elsewhere. Ravenshire. He nodded at Sebastian with the casual confidence of a man who had not yet understood his own position. Then he looked at Clara with an expression that was almost sympathetic. Lady Ashbourne. Or I suppose it is Lady Ravenshire now. A small pause, engineered for effect. A fortunate arrangement for everyone, I imagine. The Duke required a duchess, and you required, well, rescuing. He let the words settle. Around them, the nearest conversation slowed. The entire room was listening. And Edward Pembroke, who had abandoned a woman at an altar in front of London society and suffered no consequences, was now standing in the middle of that same society believing himself untouchable. Ask yourself, how long does a man like that go unchallenged? Tonight was how long. Sebastian moved. Not quickly. There was nothing rushed about it. He simply repositioned himself with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has decided something and sees no reason to perform urgency about it. He looked at Edward with an expression that contained no anger whatsoever, which was somehow the most frightening thing Clara had ever witnessed. Cold. Controlled. Absolute. You abandoned Lady Ashbourne, Sebastian said quietly, not from conscience, but from debt. Your political ambitions required Earl Whitmore's fortune, and you pursued it with the discretion of a man who hoped no one was paying attention. He paused. I was paying attention. He proceeded to dismantle Edward Pembroke in 8 sentences. The debts. The timeline of the secret engagement. The letter sent to the vicar instead of a conversation offered to Clara directly. Each fact arrived without embellishment, delivered in the same tone one uses to read a ledger, which made it considerably more devastating than fury would have been. The ballroom did not gasp. It went still, which is worse. Edward's face moved through several expressions before settling on the one available to men who have just understood they miscalculated badly. He left shortly afterward. He did not say goodbye. Sebastian found Clara by the tall windows overlooking the garden, where the first snow of February was falling in slow silence against the glass. Dance with me, he said. It was not quite a question. But it was softer than a command. Clara recognized the difference and accepted his hand. The floor was less crowded now, the evening tilting toward its final hour. They moved together in the particular quiet of people who have argued honestly and are still standing afterward. I owe you a truth, Sebastian said. Clara looked at him. You owe me several. The corner of his mouth moved. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, assembling something carefully. When I saw you at that church, when I watched you walk back down that aisle, you reminded me of her. I will not pretend otherwise. The dignity. The refusal to collapse publicly. I recognized something I had seen once before and failed to protect. Clara said nothing. She waited. I told myself the marriage was practical, he continued. I needed it to be practical. Practicality I understand. He looked at her directly, and for the first time she saw it fully, not a crack in the composure, but the composure simply set aside. But somewhere between your questions I could not answer and your refusal to become furniture in my house, that changed. The snow fell steadily outside. I thought I was rescuing a memory, Sebastian said quietly. I did not realize I was meeting someone entirely different. The music continued around them. Clara felt something shift inside her chest, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the slow and irreversible quality of something that had been frozen for a long time finally beginning to thaw. For the first time since she had stood at that altar holding wilting roses while London watched her humiliation, someone had chosen her. Not from obligation. Not from guilt. Not from the ghost of someone else. Her. Clara Ashbourne. Entirely herself. And sometimes that is all a person needs, not a grand gesture, not a perfect love story, but one honest moment with someone brave enough to mean it. The dance slowed. Snow gathered quietly against the windows. And Clara decided, in the warmth of that ballroom with Sebastian's hand steady in hers, that perhaps being left at the altar had not ruined her life after all. Perhaps it had quietly led her toward the man finally brave enough to love her honestly.
Subscribe for more interesting Duke-related stories.